Welcome to the Past Life Awakening podcast. I'm Mark Beal, your host. I'm a past life regression therapist and trainer. And today my guest is Carrie Symes. Welcome to the podcast, Carrie.
Thank you.
So I thought we could start with a bit of an overview about who you are and what we're going to talk about today. So can you tell us the modalities that you practice?
I'm an angelic Reiki master teacher. I am a somatic coach, breathwork facilitator, somatic ecstatic dance facilitator, past life regression therapist, hypnotist, and I also work with SRT.
So that's great. We'll get into discussing what those modalities are and how they work. But as another overview, what are the kind of people that you work with?
Specifically, I work with women, starseeds, light workers.
So what's your website?
Sacred Heart Clearing. So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram under Sacred Heart Clearing.
Great. And whereabouts are you?
Northwestern Pennsylvania, about 45 minutes south of Lake Erie.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about your background? So, I understand you've got some conventional healing work, and then you had a spiritual awakening in the last few years.
So for off and on for about a little over 10 years, I was a nurse aide and worked in the healthcare profession for quite a few years.
Okay. And what are we going to be talking about today? I understand you spontaneously record a number of your past lives, for example.
Yeah, so a few years ago, back in 2021, that is when I decided that I just really had this desire to learn Reiki. And then it led me into angelic Reiki, and I started actually recalling past lives. That was part of my healing journey, was really every time I would remember a past life, there would bring such a deep healing in those moments.
Let's come back to the past lives, but as you mentioned, there's that healing journey. So, what was your experience throughout early in this life with healing?
Yeah, so when I was younger, I would dream these very vivid dreams of being in different places. And then a few weeks or a few months, I would actually be in in that place that I had dreamt of. There were numerous dreams like that throughout my life, even to the point where I had a dream of my future husband, and I ended up meeting him 15 years later after I had that dream.
So let's go back to then past lives that you recall. So you mentioned you're gonna have dreams about things that are going to happen, and how are you connecting with past life events?
Yeah, so when it first started, I was really not sure what exactly was going on. There was moments of really questioning myself, thinking perhaps that I was going crazy. And through it, I have discovered that no, I'm not crazy. Uh, So even going back to one particular life where I was a monk in a monastery, and I had I was murdered in that life, and it that life particularly came up as well as numerous other ones. But a few months after me thinking that, maybe I'm just making this up, maybe I'm going crazy, I went for angelic Reiki practitioner course where the teacher had asked a couple people that were in the fields to come in and speak. Well, this one particular man came in, and as soon as he walked in the door, monastery, 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 monastery kept playing in the back of my head. And I finally, had the guts to ask him, I'm like, were you at the monastery? And his exact words were, my body is there. And before I could even say anything, he recalled everything that had transpired at that monastery. And without me even saying anything about it. And I kind of took on a lot of guilt for that life because I had done something in that life that I thought was my fault. And his next words were, "It was not your fault." So that really sealed it that, I'm not truly crazy.
And how did you tap into that in the first place? Was that
That one was either meditation or an angelic self Reiki healing session.
what was your journey with Angel Reiki? So how did you find that?
Yeah, so with angelic Reiki, so in 2021, I decided, I just really want to learn how to do Reiki. So I took a free online Reiki level 1 course just to, test the waters to see if I would like it. And then about a month later, something in the back of my mind was just telling me angels, 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 and it just would not stop. So I searched all over the place online, looking for something that really truly resonated with me. And I reached out to the teacher, and she was ironically having a level 1 and 2 class coming up in the next month. And I just went for it.
That's great. So you keep mentioning I hear this voice, monastery. I hear this voice, angel, angel. And maybe I'm a bit crazy. And so it's kind of interesting. I think I hear this quite a bit from a bunch of people. And so there is that questioning. But firstly, and so, I'm hearing voices. So firstly, what do you think that voice is?
So I really truly believe that this is divine higher wisdom guiding.
Is that part of what made you question? Is this crazy? Because to conventional wisdom or to just conventional mind, divine wisdom can appear a bit crazy, And so there's a sort of there's sanity, which is pretty ordinary, and then there's a super sanity, which can sort of transcend. And it seems crazy to the ordinary mind. But we start to realize the ordinary mind in itself is actually a bit crazy, ego driven, power hungry, foolish in many ways, but thinks it's smart. And so I think that's actually a great message that there is another layer of understanding to us, available to us. And it may seem a bit crazy, but the more that we know ourselves, the more we can see what we think is normal is a bit crazy. And we can start to see the divine that others might think is a bit crazy is actually has wisdom in it. And so, how long did it even take you to feel comfortable that this voice isn't or is something that I can be comfortable with, that I can trust, that is wise, and I don't need to doubt myself, and also I don't need to hesitate to take action. So I think these are just two really valuable principles. People hear that, doubt themselves, get into a conflict, what's right or wrong, is conventional versus spiritual. They freeze up in that, they stop taking action, and then they're stuck. And that can last for lifetimes. So I think it's a really powerful message for you to be able to say, I heard the word was good, I didn't doubt it. Opportunities opened up as I took initial actions, and I kept following through with ongoing actions and just went and did it. It didn't stop me. So I think that's a great message for people to hear and a nice story. So, what was it for you that gave you the confidence or clarity to say, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, so it definitely took about 9 months to a year. And as I said earlier, that was definitely the confirmation from the other person, stating, yes, I recall this just as you do. So that was just pure confirmation and just knowing that and trusting that what's really happening is really real.
Yeah. So you've got a number of past lives. And so you had the one being murdered as a monk. And so did you notice there were residues of, there's a lot of fear around in the world, and a lot of fear is for good reason. If you have karmic residues of being murdered, you might be a bit jumpy if you're getting triggered by that. And so you've got this positive experience of being reaffirmed. In fact, that's how that whole thing. You said, I was murdered in a past life, and I met this guy who knew about it. So that was great. Like, hang on a second. You've taken a very positive spin on that. But is there a part of it where you recognized, and there was something as well where I carried over fears of spirituality, for example, because I was murdered for my monastic beliefs? Or do you know more of the narrative details about, how I was murdered, why, for what were the morals of the story, or the limiting beliefs or emotions that you carried over from that past life?
Yeah, so specifically going back to the monk story, there was a little boy that had come into the monastery and he was seeking healing. And I was helping him to heal his wounds. He had like a few cuts and things. And I specifically told him, I said, you do have the ability to heal yourself. That following day, he went back to his village, and that following day, there was this massacre of the monastery. And that was the guilt that I had carried and the fear that I had also carried into this life of, you know, knowing that we all have this beautiful innate ability to fully heal ourselves on all levels.
Okay. So what were you guilty about? About telling him that message? And how was it a coincidence that he went back to his village? Or was it, but you made a false causal link? Or was there an actual connection where people found out what you had said to him and then there was some sort of punishment they dished out?
Yeah, so in my mind, at the time of my death, I thought it was my fault and I took on that guilt. Although I believe now that there were also other reasons beyond that, but at my time of death, I believe that's what I was feeling. And that's what, the residues that came into this physical body.
How did that guilt affect you in this life? Did it make you hesitate at some point in your life and event you and by relieving that, is that part of what helped you to then open up to all these modalities in the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, so absolutely. So that had affected me, I believe, when I was a teenager, when I was dabbling into spiritual things. But I also had kind of a darker thing happen too, where I was scared of my intuition. Something had happened back as a teen. And with that, I think that kind of carried over that fear as well.
Okay, so that's an event in this life.
Mhm.
Okay. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. It's amazing how the words that you speak are almost like spells. So I had a close friend. She was trying to cast a spell on a particular boy that she wanted to date, and his name was Mike. She cast the spell on Mike, and at that point, every other Mike in the world came out wanting to date her, except for the Mike that she wanted.
First and last name has been casting spells. Important.
Yeah. So I'm not into like witchcraft or anything, but I know how powerful it can be.
And she's doing it in a way, and then you sort of vicariously uh, felt the limit or fear, or I don't want to do that kind of thing. And so that's what you're saying, that's what was an inhibiting thing for you.
Yes. Yes. That was definitely the driver that I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna step away from this. And
Okay, well, you know what? That's kind of not that a visceral or powerful an experience in a sense, just sort of witnessing it. I mean, or what were the other consequences? She attracted a bunch of other mics, but like, did that have negative consequences?
not necessarily negative consequences now.
Okay, well, so then that makes me think is that's not that powerful of an experience in this life. So why would it be something that you cite as being a big blockage? And so then I would put my being a past life. So we want to regress to the cause and find causes of issues. And when we get a cause, but it doesn't look powerful enough to really make a lot of sense, or certainly be the full story, then I would think, well, where's that coming from? And is there another root cause earlier in this life or in a past life? And you did mention on your website, you say I recalled past lives in the Salem Witch Trials. So you mentioned I don't really want to get in this witchy stuff, but my friend does. And just seeing that doesn't seem like the full blocking thing. But if you had a past life as a witch going on trial, that's a visceral experience that make you very wary of getting involved in that kind of thing. So am I on the right track here? Can you tell us
Oh,
about that?
absolutely. Absolutely. So we want to go back to Salem.
Sure.
All right. So when I first recalled this memory, so this was back in Salem area. I'm not saying that it's, specifically Salem, but that was the general area. So had been accused of witchcraft. However, I was not a witch. All I was doing was using herbs as ailments and things of that nature. I was using the natural ways that had been taught for centuries upon centuries. And there were other women in the village that were being accused as well. And I was pointed out as from them by uh, as being a witch. So, which also brings into the dynamic of women controversy as well. I was accused, and as I was being accused, they decided to take me out onto the ocean, put me on a stake in the middle of the ocean when the tide was low. And as the tide grew, I essentially was eaten and drowned by the waters and the animals. And so, jumping forward to this life, I had always had an aversion to sand. I hated playing with sand ever since I was little. I hated the texture of it, I hated the feel of it. And as I recalled this past life, it made so much sense as to why I do not like sand. And as I am, as I was at the stake and looking out onto the land, I see my husband just standing there watching. And ironically, same husband as this current life. So after I had drowned, he had taken a boat and came out, took me off the stake, and buried my body.
Okay. So obviously a loving husband, a loving relationship. And so do you recall some of the emotions? Because that is something that as we're doing past life regression, we take people to past lives, but the past death is often very significant. And even the reaction to the death. So we are able to witness or experience your soul floating over the body. And it seems like you were able to, and typically people can see what happens in the minutes, hours, and even weeks afterwards. And they can understand the feelings and thoughts of the people around and the reaction to their death. So was that your experience? And if so, what kind of thoughts and feelings were you having and your husband having?
Yeah, so I was definitely feeling a huge relief. Um, and my husband and I, it might sound we have this great relationship, but it's rocky sometimes. And at that point in time, we had been going through a little tiff, and this was the deep healing that, just needed to really take place for that moment, not only from myself, but for him, because my healing also, rubs off on his as well.
That's a great point. So I think one thing for people to understand in past lives is that even the past lives we recall have everything to do with the exact moment that we're in. So if you're there in this life saying, I've been with this guy for, 18 years, wouldn't mind a little bit of separation. and then you recall being separated. You recall the emotion in that past life of not wanting to be separated. You recall the intention that I don't want to die young. I want to grow old with you. I don't want to be separated. And that's the feelings and thoughts you had in the past life. And that's the message and the feelings and thoughts you can reconnect with. And so being able to reconnect with that is something that can sort of set you right in a particular time. So did you notice that connection? Is that right? And did you notice it at the time, or was it looking back on it where you went, aha?
Yeah, it was definitely looking back where it's like, oh, wow.
Okay. And did you literally do that? Did you have those feelings that I really don't want to be separated from you? And obviously he didn't if he was sitting there, he could have possibly renounced you and just sort of moved on and taken a mistress or whatever. But it sounds like he sort of stood by you. So was he a caring husband who really sacrificed and stood up for you at that time?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so that's the kind of, and it's interesting where sometimes you might even think maybe he's sort of having an off day or an off year in this life. You can think this guy is not pulling his weight or standing up for me or stepping up in life. And then you remember, well, he sort of stepped up in a major way in a past life. And he's done a lot in this life, actually. The last couple of years is sort of having an off phase. But let you remember, when he's at his best, he's about as good as it gets. So let me just sort of ride out this low patch, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was last year where I did a QHHT session where uh discovered that we have lived 700 and some lives together. So we have a lot of history.
Wow. Okay. So that's two significant past lives. Actually, where was that monastery past life? Would you know the country or what tradition?
I do not. The other person, though, does know the exact monastery and everything.
Okay.
Yes.
Was it Christian or
Um, no, it was more of a Buddhist.
okay. Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so then you mentioned so there's Egypt, Atlantis, and Lyra. So while we're on this theme, let's just stick with these. And
Yeah.
so let's sort of stay terrestrial and then we'll move step by step. So and coincidentally, I have an Asian Buddhist past life as well, which a lot of people do, by the way. And so I think a lot of people watching this, people that are healers or that meditate, will have had that past life like that. As you say, there are hundreds, 600 with one guy. The chances of having, hundreds, there are many lives, and I think a lot of opportunity to have a dedicated spiritual life. And so I think this is something people can relate to, whether they know it or not. And Egypt is one I had as well. And so for you, what was your experience in Egypt? How did you recall it? And why do you think it came up at the time that it did in your life? What, it's nice to say I was this and that in my past life, but how did it relate to what was happening in your life when you recalled it?
Yeah. So this was right after Angelic went into class, and I had dropped my daughter off at bowling practice. And there's a trail right next to the bowling alley, a walking trail in nature. And so I, and this was a typical night, I'd walk a few miles on the trail. And as I was walking, I had this extreme severe hip pain to the point where I was literally limping step by step. And I was like 2 miles in, and there was no way that, the only way to get out of it was just to continue walking. And let me jump back. So, when I was pregnant with my daughter, my last daughter, she sat on my sciatic nerve, and she actually caused a lot of hip pain in my left hip, extreme pain to the point where I would be walking and my leg would literally give out from under me. So after I gave birth, that pain kind of continued to persist. And it would come off and on. throughout the years. It'd be good some days it would be fine. So as I'm walking, this pain kicked back up, and I'm walking and just trying to focus because it was so excruciating. And all of a sudden, this memory just starts absolutely flooding into my brain that I was in Egypt. I was pregnant with a child, and my husband did not believe that it was his child. And as I was giving birth to this child, he literally ripped the baby from me and in the process broke my hip. And as this is all happening and taking place, and I'm continuing to walk and walk and walk, my pain just like went away. It was just unbelievable as this memory is coming through. This pain is just going away. It was just absolutely fascinating and incredible.
Okay. And how's it been since?
It's been really, really good. It's, I might have a slight, small little issues from time to time, but nothing nowhere near what
Okay.
I had experienced in the past.
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting. So past life karmic residues, the previous one you mentioned was it was predominantly guilt as an emotion, and it's not your fault was kind of the solution. And this time, so there's physical, and then there can be a limiting belief from the Salem Witch Trials, which I believe is very dangerous to do any kind of unorthodox healing work. So I got a limiting belief from the witch trials in the United States. We got an emotion from the Asian monastery, and now we've got a physical residue primarily from the Egyptian past life. Were there emotions and limiting beliefs connected with that in some way that you're aware of, or uh, from this? So you had this physical release. Were there other emotional or mental releases from that?
Yeah, so the husband in that past life was also my current husband. When I was pregnant with my daughter, shortly after that, that is when a lot of issues with my husband and I came up. A lot of issues, to the point where we had filed divorce papers, and but we ended up working everything out. 22 years later, we're here. I'm almost taking it as if it was like the beginning of the healing process for that life. Yeah.
So what was that emotion then? Was he had ripped the baby off you, hurt your hip, and so you had a physical relief, but did it then bring up emotions of anger towards him and wanting to and wanting to separate from him or blame towards him? So how did that manifest?
Yeah. So part of the rest of that, is I had this back when I was pregnant with my daughter. I had this feeling that he was cheating on me. And that was one of the biggest things. And I think that was really the catalyst and driver to that. And it's funny because the role was almost reversed in a way. So it was almost like that karmic pattern healing itself in a way, because the roles were reversed in this instance, where in that life he thought I was cheating on him, and in this life I thought he was cheating on him. So it was, yeah.
There can be repeating patterns where the same thing can happen again, or balancing patterns where sort of the opposite happens again, where there's a role reversal. So that's an interesting pattern that we see in past lives. So okay, and so then Atlantis. So what was your the past life there, the connection to this life?
Yeah, so that was really interesting, because I was recall walking like in this beautiful, um this beautiful, uh, like garden almost, but it was like outside this amazing, beautiful emerald castle almost as if it was like. And I was a healer in that I worked with the healing beds. And the piece that I first initially recalled was I was in the healing chambers where these massive crystal healing beds were. And then all of a sudden, there was just this flush of water coming in, this flush of water. And one of the big pillars crashed on top of me and, you know, obviously killed me.
How did that come down? Was that part of the end days, that its destruction, or?
Yes, that was definitely when the flood happened in the end days of Atlantis.
Okay. And so how old were you when that happened in that life?
I was a man and I was probably approximately end of 30s, early 40s. How
Okay.
ironic.
Okay. Yeah, same, similar to now. So, and so
Yeah.
what were your feelings and thoughts as that happened?
There weren't really necessarily thoughts or feelings, I don't believe.
Okay, so well, you didn't feel guilt. You didn't feel I went off the path and somehow it wasn't and guilty for part of it, the deterioration of this place, some sort of punishment. You didn't feel sadness that we had such a perfect place and everything was going along so great, and then why is this happening? Anything, and what do you think some of the consequences were? So, and I ask that because whatever emotions that you take in that time of death, we've seen how in some of your other lives they affect you. But in that one, it could just be, well, if there wasn't that much, you don't carry too much of a residue negatively or emotionally. But do you feel in that, because I was actually going to ask before about Egypt, were you a wife and mother, or were you a healer as well? What kind of occupation did you have? But so then you mentioned I'm a man, and but then in Egypt at that time it's probably a bit more male dominated. But you mentioned now I'm Atlantis, I'm a male, I'm a healer, and you're able to have 20 years of healing experience as an adult, and so you're able to live a decent chunk. I've actually in my book I've got somebody who she was literally 18, 19, and she was killed in the end moments of Atlantis as well. But she felt that I did something wrong. I've caused this. I'm guilty for it. And she carried that guilt into this life and therefore a bit of an aversion to healing. And so it sounds like for you're not reconnecting with a negative emotion or limiting belief, but so it becomes a resource in which you can remember, oh, I had some healing techniques. And so that's one thing. If I'm doing a past life regression to something like that, I'd want to find out what kind of healing did you do? What kind of abilities did you have? Can you reconnect with those and bring some of that knowledge into this life? And it may be some sort of specific knowledge, well, sometimes it just might be the knowledge that I am a spiritual healer. So people might think I want to do spiritual healing. I'm 36, 37. I've got some sort of background in it, but I'm not sure if I'm really that much of a spiritual person. It's a bit of a risk to go into the spiritual healing profession when I haven't done much of it in this life and I'm already 40. But if you can go, well, I was 40 then and I'd done 20 years of it and lived 40 years in Atlantis, a great healing society, I can think I don't have much experience in this life, but if I've got a whole lifetime or many lifetimes of it in the past, I feel a little bit better about taking the action and driving to Detroit and doing an angel healing course because it's not my first rodeo. What do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah, absolutely. So even in Egypt, I was a healer as well there too. So
Okay. Okay, really, as a
yeah.
woman, what kind of healing were
Yes.
you in Egypt?
I worked in the chambers with ISIS.
Okay, well, in what kind of way? What kind of work? And tell us about that.
And it was actually, um, now that I think about it, kind of ironic that I was also helping people transition there as well.
Well, this like we haven't discussed any of this, but it's coincidental because in my book I mention working in Egypt, and I had that. So I've got my first case study is of the one I mentioned, a lady in Atlantis. She's a psychiatrist in this life, but is hesitant to go into spiritual healing because she had this negative emotional and limiting belief from her past life death in Atlantis. And the next case study that I have in my book is I recall there's a similar thing. I'm in my mid 20s, but thinking I've got training in economics. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. Why? And I have this inner voice, a higher self, and inner wisdom telling me go on the spiritual path. And I've got the rest of the world saying, get a good job, work in finance, become 6'5", have a trust fund. That's what works in this life. Get a TikTok account. But so as I got those messages, I recalled being in Egypt, being in a sleep temple whispering with people in a darkened room, regressing them to past lives. And I realized, oh, I'm remembering a past life in which I was a past life regression therapist. So being a regression therapist in this life doesn't seem so crazy because I've already done it. And so it's a coincidental experience. I mentioned, a lot of people will have a monastic, a Buddhist past life. We've got that in common, and that's ordinary. That's not even a coincidence, like most people do. But the fact that you've got an Egyptian healer past life is now getting to be a bit of a coincidence.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So anything else you can tell us about that past life, and what did it mean for you?
Yeah, there was actually a lot of healing with that life, a lot of healing. And that one was, I think, the biggest catalyst to really push me forward on the healer's path. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That one was absolutely huge.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, amazing. Well, me too. Snap. That was a
Yeah.
big like convincer that, for me that, move forward on the spiritual path, drop the conventional thing, don't bother wearing a suit, go forward and do this crazy stuff. And 20 years later, I've been doing it full time for 20 years. So that's great. So then the last past life you mentioned is Lyra, which I haven't heard about. Although I often don't ask for names when people get celestial. But am I right in saying this is a constellation?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, well, so can you tell us about a past life in Lyra?
Yeah. So this was when I had just started angelic Reiki, and my teacher had said, I think you need to look into Lyra. I'm like, okay. So I, YouTube, is kind of your best friend when you start out on this journey because you have so many questions and there's so many things on YouTube. So I uh, started watching a video, and then just all of a sudden it was like that. This memory came flooding in of being on Lyra, and I was helping all the children to escape from the reptilians because they were attacking our entire world. They were attacking our village. They were attacking our entire planet. And I helped all of these little children escape, and we all hid in a cave. And later, throughout the years, I've been recalling more bits and pieces of it. In that, one of the people that actually one of my angelic Reiki students one of my was my mother. And I was learning under her to be like the village healer, the you know, and also when I was took I it was angelic Reiki 3 and 4 class in Michigan. I was doing a healing during class on one of the other students where my teacher had said, I think you could stay at this person's house. Neither one of us knew who we were. And so we stayed together for that weekend, and she ended up being my sister in Lyra. So just amazing coincidences because I saw this vision as I was doing this healing with her. And that's really typical with angelic Reiki when I give healing sessions is a lot of times I will see other people's past lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the people in Lyra, you mentioned reptilians are attacking. What are they? What are the people like there? So what
You
kind
mean
of yeah, like what kind of form do they take? They're not human, obviously, presumably. So and we could call them ETs. So people often ask, have you ever regressed somebody to a life not on Earth? And have has anyone ever had an ET past life? And so, like, what's the name of the people that live in Lyra, and what kind of beings are they?
so if you almost want to think, if you've ever seen the movie Avatar,
Okay.
kind of similar resemblance, a little different in some ways, but that's really the only way to kind of describe it. Yeah.
Okay. So it is, and is it a forest type environment?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Very much so. Very nature oriented, very, very, very down to earth and, connection with all the elements.
Okay. Okay, and so did it remind you? Is it a healing? Do people go there to learn healing? Like presumably Atlantis has got a fair part of that, where it's sort of quite healing orientated. Is Lyra something where it emphasizes the connection to nature and oneness with all beings and organic life? Or what's sort of the main theme, or why would people incarnate in Lyra? What are they about?
Yeah, so we were so much in tune with nature and just the connection and the oneness, connection of all beings. Yeah, it's
Okay.
beautiful.
Okay. And so you were being trained. So how old were you? And so did you mention you were being attacked by the reptilians? Uh, what was that about? What happened there? And so what was the rest of that narrative? Yeah, how did what was the middle and how did it end?
And it's really interesting because time was very much different there. I was probably 500 to 600 years old.
Okay.
However, during that time frame, that would be similar to where I'm at now in my 40s.
Okay.
So that, if that kind of gives a little bit better perspective.
Yeah.
Uh, and I was training under my mother to become this healer. Yeah.
Okay. And so how did it end? The reptilians attacked.
Mm.
Why did they attack? Were they after resources, unobtainium, if you like? Or what were they about?
Yeah. So they were definitely after resources. Absolutely. And we hid in this cave, and that's just the last thing I remember is just hiding in the cave.
So what kind of connection did it have to this life and any sort of residues of emotional thought?
Yeah, so that one I've had bits and pieces throughout the years come back to me. And the first one was initially just in the cave, and I didn't even know the healing piece at that point in time. And it was a deep connection with coming out of the cave, and in essence, coming out into the world. And then, as I recalled that I was this healer and I saw my sister, that is when a lot of the remembering came back as well. And I felt almost as if a relief, and it was a more catalyst to drive me forward with my healing path.
And now we can shift gears a little bit because what I tend to find is that so hypnotherapists might think that past lives are a bit kooky, but they're happy to regress people. Now, of course, psychologists think hypnotists are a little bit odd in using hypnosis and regression, but then hypnotherapists think past life people might be a little bit odd. But then past life people can often think, well, all those other people think I'm odd, I'm not. But then when you start talking about spirit entity attachments, even past life therapists start going, what now? You've crossed a line. But if you've got a karmic connection to all these things that you've mentioned, as I do and you do, where we're on a similar vibe and have a similar karmic kind of a background, then what tends to happen is that if you do enough past life regression, you're likely to find, and you're connecting with spirit guides, soul groups, and various types of entities, then you may start finding a bit of light and a bit of dark. And oftentimes, the brighter the light, then sometimes the darker the shadow. And so, what I'm leading up to is that there's another modality that we call spirit releasement therapy, which is whether we like it or not, or whether it's spontaneous or intentional, we can find that we're clearing dark entities and attachments from people. So this is something that you mention sort of in brief on your website. And I've got a training course on it, of course. So can you tell us a bit about how you first came in contact with that? Is it something that you'd even been averse to? And I'd actually been averse to it or just not interested in any of this kind of thing. I didn't explore tarot or have friends that were doing stuff when I was young. Just completely not interested. I was intellectually interested in Buddhism up until my mid-20s. And then, whether you like it or not, suddenly you have to deal with it. So what was the experience of finding out that this level of energy can exist and you can interact with it therapeutically with clients? What was your journey like with entity attachments and these kind of things?
Yeah, so I think actually no, I know. Um, one of the biggest ones that I recall was I was giving a reading in a spiritual church. And, it's pretty common for people to stand up and give readings in the church. And so I was giving this reading to this one man who was the first time he had been in there. And all of a sudden, I see this huge black cloud like trying to come at me. And I just totally blocked everything off and, tried to remain calm and keep my composure about the whole thing. And one of the things with entities is you cannot show any fear. And that's exactly what I did is I just remained calm, kept my composure and was like, no, we're not dealing with this today. And, politely closed down the reading and went about my business. But yeah, that was that was a very interesting experience. And that was the first time I had actually seen this really with my eyes. I've always known that there's, darker forces at play sometimes. I'm not, I was always one that has always been drawn to um, scary movies with ghosts and things like that. That it's always interested me. And yeah.
So how did it manifest in the clients that you work with? And so is that something that came up while you were working with people one-to-one therapeutically, like doing Reiki?
Yeah, so this can often come up, absolutely. I'm particularly seeing this with some clients right now. There's different ways that it can manifest and come into play, and it's not always pretty.
Well, so you mentioned a black cloud, so there's a visual element. Then, so what was it like in terms of the other senses? Did you auditorily, and you even said in my head, I'm not dealing with this today, which is a valid initial response. So your first interaction can be, I see it, I say to it, not today, and I feel calm, calm enough to dismiss it. And so from that, did that though then motivate you to go and get uh, some more confidence around it? So, and that confidence can come with competence. So I need to do some more research. so that if it does pop up again, I can say, all right, today is the day because I know what to say. And what I wanted to say before was, I'll do it when I'm ready, not when you're ready. So come back later. And then if it does come back, then you've got the opportunity to say, all right, now I'm ready to work through it. And you can do that with a calmness, which is calmly knowing that I can leave, or calmly knowing I'm going to stay and talk to you, and I'm going to feel, and then you get into what they're feeling and what your client's feeling. So is that what happened? How did you progress and being able to like deal with it more actively instead of just closing it down?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. That was like, okay, if we're going to start on this track, we're going to learn more about it and learn how to deal with it. And that's when I actually discovered your website and took your SRT class. Yeah.
Cool. So what, and so that's something as well, because you meant, so what was it about the course that you connected with, and how did it help and make you realize, and even did it help you make some distinctions, which is if you start off seeing there's a black image, which is sort of a bit fuzzy and hazy. And then did it help you specify, like, oh, I can engage with it verbally, and I can make distinctions between earthbound spirits, dark force entities, other kind of device attachments. So what was it that sort of resonated or felt true for you, or was relevant in what you were experiencing?
Yeah. So, there were a lot of things that, I didn't know exactly how to interact with them at first. And your course just actually really helped me to be able to interact with them, kind of identify, if they're in Earthbound or whether they're um, a dark force entity or anything, or an ET. That just really helped me be able to identify. And there's different ways of, you know, uh, dealing with each one. So that
Yeah.
was perfect, because since then I've dealt with um, actually quite a few earthbounds. There's been many of those that I've dealt with, a few dark force entities, and I think one ET.
Okay. So yeah, so that's a great start. So a lot of people say, and I think I do past life regression. I think spirit releasement's a bit weird. It might have come up, but I've shut it down, and I don't really want to deal with it. And so I say, well, and if it's come up, the next step, you can shut it down. That's okay, but take the next step and do a bit of research. It's like I don't
Mhm.
feel confident doing it. I go, well, you shouldn't feel confident. You should grow in competence, which is take that as some motivation to do a bit of study, which is exactly what you did. So therefore, you grew in competence. Therefore, your confidence came up, and then you could work on it. And then the other thing is people say, I release spirits. I go, what kind of spirits? And they go, what? Go, yeah, I did. There's a spirit attached. There's a spiritual energy, and I release it. And I go, well, what kind of energy? And they go, they don't know what they don't know. And so there's a limit there, which is if you don't know what it is you're releasing, you may probably didn't release it, you know, or you've got a lot more to learn. So keep learning. Don't think that we all need to have a humility to know what we don't know. And we're living in an infinite world. And I know there's a tremendous amount that I don't know because we're not capable of knowing the infinite. But I do know that there's a lot we can continue to study. And that is one of those things. If you don't know what you're releasing, then keep studying. And so you can figure it out and make those distinctions. And so the three categories, the main ones, and this is also I'm not making this up. William Baldwin wrote a brilliant book called Spirit Releasement Therapy in 1991, which is incredible, quite difficult to understand, honestly. So I've sort of made it sort of clear and digestible in my course and use a lot of examples from my own experiential knowledge as well. But I think that's that key thing. And what you mentioned is a lot of ETs, a lot of EBs, earthbound spirits, if some DFEs, dark force entities, and the occasional ET. And that's pretty much statistically, I've done it, hundreds and hundreds of times. And that's about how the stats go. So the first thing you'll be dealing with is EBs. And the good thing to know about that, earthbound spirits, is that you can engage with them conversationally. And that doesn't mean telling them to go into the light. Like if you say that and that works, then great. But if it doesn't, or they even say they've gone into the light, they may not have, And so what we want to do, instead of just telling them, we want to have a conversation and find out what's going on. And so we can heal our clients from whatever traumas or limiting beliefs or emotions they've got. But we can also heal some of these attachments by discussing with them, finding out about who they are, being curious, knowing we don't know. If I just say, oh, you're a spirit, go into the light, I wouldn't say that because I don't know enough. I know that I don't know, and I know I have to ask questions like, who are you? Why are you attached? How long have you been there? What emotions are stuck within you that if we can release them that way, when you say you go into the light, you're really doing it. So that's the next step. So, and there are a number of reasons why earthbounds can be stuck. They can be confused. They can have emotional issues. So, what are the kind of patterns that you're finding with earthbound spirits in particular?
Yeah, it seems like they have been really attaching to those that are, seeking more spiritual help and spiritual guidance and but don't necessarily know how to fully do it properly
Okay.
in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so, well, what these earthbounds, are they trying to help? Are they curious? Like, why are they seeking out these spiritually people from your?
Yeah, so they're specifically seeking them out because they feel this light within them and they feel drawn to that. One particular case is this person gave off a very motherly energy, and the attachment was a little child, you know, seemingly innocent, but this child was trying to play with her and pick up her limbs and things like that. And yeah, so
Interesting. So, what was the resolution? What to that? How did you deal with it?
yeah, so what I did with her is I asked why she was there, and she said because she feels like she's my mom and I want to play with her, and she felt this lovingly energy towards her. And she said that she just wanted to play. She just wanted to play. And so how I dealt with that was I told her, I'm like, well, you can play with your real mom on the other side. You can go and play with her over there and it's safe and you can have all the fun that you want to have.
Exactly. So, that's an example of an earthbound spirit. When they pass, they're supposed to go to the light,
Mhm.
but she didn't go to the light. She got lost. Time passed by, and then she went to a light. And so that's when we need to explain to them, you're kind of trying to do the right thing, but you've made a little mistake, which is you've gone to a light and you think going to a light is a good idea and it's limited. What you really want to do is go to the light. And that's a lot better. And so they're a little bit confused, they're a bit disorientated. They've got a good intention in some way, and then you're redirecting them. You're taking their positive intention, but making it more skillful. So that's a great example. So that's earthbound spirits, and there are a number of other possible variations. But let's go into dark force spirits, because these can be entities that attach to somebody, not based on sort of love or motherliness, but based on connecting with someone's anger or fear. So, what's an example of dark force entity attachments and the kind of energy that they've attached to, and even and the effects that that's had on people? Can you think of a client where that's happened? And did they know that it was happening and bring it in as an issue, or did it come up spontaneously and you realized, oh, that's what it was?
Yeah, so specifically, there was a client that had come in. She just wanted just a general healing. And this
Okay.
is where went really interesting. As I was doing the healing, there was this almost black cloud that just, came out. And this is different in that, it wasn't necessarily SRT, but it was the help of, the angelic kingdom, the angelic angels. And that's where, things are kind of a little different with what I do. Um, and just the angels like encapsulated this black cloud of energy and took it away. It
Yeah.
just
What?
incredible to witness. Yeah.
Okay. Was there a discussion about deceptions or any of that kind of thing? So that's sort of a more an energetic, visual, and kinesthetic kind of approach. And so that's still part of spirit releasement, by the way. We definitely bring in the Archangel Michael, visualize them taking and encapsulating them in a healing net of light and taking them to their allotted place in the light. And if you can do all of that visually and emotionally, sending love and compassion and empathy to that dark being instead of being angry at them or afraid of them, having that love and compassion, if you can do all that visually and kinesthetically, great. What tends to happen is if you do that and the dark force entity starts laughing, swearing, yelling, a long tirade of trying to confuse you or deceive you, or a lot of verbal, then we can step in verbally as well. But if you can release them without having to get to that stage, fantastic. But they can. So have you had verbal dark force entities, by the way, where you've got into the sort of a long conversation?
Not verbal, no.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that's great. And so even angelically, Archangel Michael is often a big one. Do you work with Archangel Michael or do you have other entities as part of your process?
Yeah, so Archangel Michael, he is actually like one of the first angels that with the angelic Reiki we is always there.
Yeah.
Always there. He's the one that overlights the session. So, and that's one thing that I always do with any of my work
Yeah.
is I bring in the angelic Reiki piece to everything that I do in ensuring that, Archangel Michael essentially has my back.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So he's the key figure in SRT as I know it. And so we specifically ask him to be there, but my feeling is if you don't know who he is, he'll be there anyway. you know.
Totally.
So I mean that omnipresent as a being when it comes to this stuff. So that's great to know. And so yeah, so as a quick takeaway, if people find that they're able to send things to the light and bring in archangels like Michael, and that's great. If they need some assistance and it does get verbal, then my training course goes into that. But for a lot of people, that will be enough, and it's kind of quite rare. But rare and depends on who you are, which is some people will never have to experience this in their career. But if you're karmically connected to them as I am, and then I get into these conversations, debates with them linguistically, quite a bit. I'm also linguistically sort of orientated as a being, so I tend to attract the linguistic types, and I have a little sparring session and a nice little chat where I can spin words for against them. So then, lastly, ETs. There's something that come up as attachments, and so how do you experience that? You meant you've had a few of those, and so how have they manifested in your work?
Yeah, so sometimes the one instance that I had with a client, it was attached and it was interesting. There was definitely a dialogue with that one, in that, they wanted to kind of hold on because, they weren't sure what was going to happen. And it was just a really odd dialogue with them.
Okay, well, sorry, who wanted to hold on? That the client wanted to hold on to the ET or both?
The ET wanted to hold on to the client.
What did the client want? A number of things can happen actually. So you've already mentioned remembering a past life as an ET or uh, you know, and so a lot of times people have an ET attachment are actually quite happy to it. So like it can happen both ways. The ET wants to hold on to them, but they also want to hold on to the ET. So what was your client's feeling?
The client didn't really want it either. So,
Was the client having negative effects on their life because of it?
yes,
What were they?
they were very much apprehensive, unsure of things, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, when you do that, they're crossing a bit of a boundary. There's a sort of a certain sovereignty that we have where any form of, it's one thing to have a communication with something, maybe to channel it occasionally, but to have it attached is they're crossing a boundary. You've got a boundary issue, got a bit of a sovereignty issue, and people will and whether you know it or not, a lot of times by the time I see people, they see significant negative impacts in this life and they finally want to get rid of it, but they'll realize I may have invited it, or I may have even agreed to it in a past life, and then the ET will say, "You can't get rid of me. You agreed to this. This is part of your life purpose." And they'll say, "But I don't want it." And they say, "Well, you're contractually bound to," and this is part of the verbal conversation we get into, which is I know I may well have said that, but I break the bonds of time. I undo that contract. I have the sovereignty to decide what I do in this moment, and I'm not a slave to any intention that I had in the past. And therefore, I release. And so that then becomes a little bit like I demand you to release, which is a technique that you can say that and it can work. But we also want to get a little bit more to a point where everybody's just really happy to do that. And so we might see, I might like that child, that little baby. I know you've got a positive intent and you're attracted to this motherly energy, but I'm not your mother, and it's time for you to move on. And so with an ET, it might be, I understand that there may be a positive intent. There may be something where you may have been my past life mother in that ET realm and on another planet, but nevertheless, it's not appropriate to be attached to me in this life. And even if it was at some point, it's having a negative consequence, and I no longer give permission for that. Therefore, I love and I honor the past life that we had. I appreciate and have gratitude and acceptance of whatever ever troubles that I might have even had in this life as a consequence. I've been negatively impacted by this and I've been in pain because of it, but I accept that and I have no anger or animosity. I forgive and appreciate and whatever lessons I needed to learn from that. But in this moment, enough is enough. And as I've explained that to you, I forgive you. I give love and caring and compassion. Do you agree now that it is the best thing to move on? And they go, well, now that you've explained it and I understand everything, absolutely, I go in peace. You don't need to yell at me to go. I go willingly and I understand it. And thank you for sharing all of that information. I've learned my lessons as well. And this is all part of something that we needed to learn, and we can evolve and move on into the light. And I go with love and appreciation. So that's kind of the dialogue that we can get into. And you can actually get into something like that with dark force entities and certainly with ETs. And so, yeah, does that make sense to you? Is that a similar kind of thing happen, or how did it go for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and it was a very similar dialogue to that, actually. Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Okay. Any other
Mhm.
differences or anything you can say in your own words? What was it literally? So I gave the example, of there was a connection, like you were my mother in a past life, or there was an agreement. So what did you find out in that case, and for that one?
Yeah, so that one was there was almost like a contract in a past life. But it was like it was that one was just so weird. Because it was like a partial contract in a way,
Okay.
if that kind of makes sense.
Where in what way?
The client had agreed to it, but not agreed to it.
Okay.
And they just attached anyway, regardless.
Okay. And so how much time did it take for you to sort of renegotiate that contract or get clear on the sort of the little conflict and then resolve it and say, because they try and use that confusion of you've sort of agreed and didn't, and how did you get out of that and how much persuasion did it take and how quick were they to realize, oh yes, actually that's true. I'll go with what you say.
They said that, you know, they would honor what they want now. And that's when they decided to kind of go.
Yeah. That's great. And so this is what I'm talking about. Like linguistically, like if someone says, if you've got an ET attachment, I think I see that. I think this happens a lot, which is that people do a regression, find an ET attachment. The ET says, oh, you agreed to this in a past life. and the person says, they agreed in a past life, therefore I can't separate it. That is a sacred bond. We must honor whatever the ET says because the ET is a wise one, they're smarter than me. No, just know that you don't know. Don't think that you know because an ET told you. Keep questioning, keep asking, keep figuring it out. And I know there's something a bit necessary to dig into because there's a boundary issue, there's a sovereignty issue. When they tell you you've got a contract, you're stuck in that contract. Contracts expire. Contracts have partial ins and outs. It's a little bit more complex. Don't think that you know. Oh, it's a contract, therefore they can never get out of it. Nonsense. Just dig in and find out about that contract. And then you find out all these nuances and just keep digging and keep bearing in mind that let's move towards this idea that there is proper boundaries should be maintained and overall sovereignty, and we should be in the moment, not carry residues of our past lives for us, even if, because that's one thing people can easily say, I had a past life residue of guilt or blame from, the monastery. Therefore, I let that go. Obviously, of course I would. But if people get a magical ET, and that's a past life residue, but I would never think of cutting that off because it's an ET and it's special. Well, it's not. It's just the same as any old karmic residue from the past that is not in resonance with universal laws or your sovereignty in the now. So you can cut that off as well. You're still absolutely acknowledging the past lives you had and its wisdom and everything you've learned from it, but you are not beholden to it. And the ultimate authority comes from you, and it's not from something external. And so don't give up that sovereignty and do continue to dig in. And so that's great. And so that's actually what happens. If you don't dig into it and you just say, it said it was allowed to attach, so I just let it be, well, then, you've stopped 10% down the road of having done the job properly, But if you continue to go down that road and find out what happens, you find exactly what you did, which is in the end, they agreed that even though they thought they had permission in one way, in another way, they sort of realized that actually it is for the best that what you stuck to your guns. And then they will just go, yes, you're right. Actually, now that you've really thought about it and dug into it, I see that's how it is better to be done. So I agree to go. So that's a really important lesson and learning for people as well. I think a lot of people get stuck on that and feel that they hand over power even. And so it's one thing as well, as this conversation started, you can hear this inner voice of wisdom that maybe I'm a bit crazy, maybe I should listen to it. And the difficulty becomes if we hear every voice that's an inner one that seems wise or different to our conscious mind and start believing everything that we hear, that's where spirit attachment issues come up. And so we become a little bit like the baby, which is naive, and will just cling to any light. We've got to remember always, to connect to like the ultimate light and not get tricked into lesser lights or partial lights, even if they come across as wise in some way. So yes, I think it's a really nice point that an example you bring up for ETs and SRT in general. And we can do that, and as we're doing that, we can do it kind of jokingly and lightly in conversation and just sort of figuring out that actually I'm more powerful and empowered than I think, and I don't have to do what I'm told, and people are very, very quick to not do what they're told when it's by a human, but they're pretty quick to do what they're told when it's by an ET because they're sort of super special or something, you know? So what do you think? Is that something that you sort of see implicitly in the ideas of your clients, or is that something that you sort of thought initially as you were getting into this and just realized, what, as I dig into it, it's sort of interesting how they actually respond, and I have the power to influence the direction it goes to, and I don't have to bow down every time some entity that I don't fully understand comes up, and I can still have my own spiritual authority and do my best for my client. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely something that, has been such a huge help in understanding how to really deal with them. And it's really interesting, the dialogue that you can have with some of these entities. It's really interesting because just in some of my, you know, education and research, it's just fascinating, what the soul tries to hang on to, specifically talking about EVs, Earthbounds, it's fascinating, that guilt can, get trapped here, the guilt. So it's it just fascinates me beyond
Yeah. Fantastic.
all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's been a fascinating discussion with you. So thanks very much for sharing. It's been great to hear about your past lives and getting to the entity work. So for people that are fascinated by this and are curious to find out about their own past lives, and or suspect that they may have some spirit issues, and a lot of times people listening to this might even think, oh, you know what, I had did some work with some EBs or ETs, and my therapist stopped short. And I realize now they could have probably kept on going a little bit and had a bit more of a chat. Then you and I both offer these kind of sessions. So I'm at the Past Life Awakening Institute. So they can go to my website. And for your website, where can they go to again? Can you remind us?
Sacred Heart Clearing.
Sacred Heart Clearing. Fantastic. Okay. So actually, so any last words, any last messages as we wrap this up?
Yeah, so definitely, follow your path, whatever that is. And, know that there is healing out there if you have apprehensions on anything. I think that's really the biggest takeaway from probably the session is that, if you have apprehensions against something that you really want to do, that you feel that, is really calling to your soul, perhaps maybe it's a past life residue, hindering you from stepping forward, and I would invite you to, really dive into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that it can open things up and allow you to move forward in this life, as you've
Mhm.
proven with all of your past lives have been very relevant to this life. So that's a great message. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark.